"Grandma, why are you eating all by yourself on Christmas?" my grandson asked, and suddenly the entire dining room went silent. Even the soft Christmas music playing from the living room seemed to disappear for a moment. I looked up from the small folding table they had placed near the kitchen doorway and saw 12 pairs of eyes avoiding mine. Some stared at their wine glasses. Others focused very hard on cutting their ham. My daughter-in-law Vanessa forced a smile so tight it barely looked human anymore. "Ethan, sweetheart," she said carefully. "Grandma said she wanted somewhere quiet." But Ethan frowned the way children do when adults say something that makes no sense. "But everybody else is sitting together." No one answered him. I lowered my eyes to my plate and gently folded my napkin across my lap, pretending not to notice the shame crawling across the room like smoke. "I'm Margaret Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, and until 3 years ago, I used to sit at the head of this table every Christmas beside my husband Harold. Back then this house smelled like cinnamon, pine needles and roasted turkey from sunrise until midnight. Harold would carve the turkey while I poured cider for the grandchildren. The dining room would glow with candlelight and laughter. But after Harold passed away from a heart condition 2 weeks before New Year's, something inside this family quietly shifted. Not all at once. Not enough for anyone to admit it openly. Just little things. Forgotten invitations. Family photos taken without calling me over. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Vanessa had mastered the art of exclusion so delicately that even my own son Daniel barely noticed it happening. Or maybe he noticed and decided silence was easier. This Christmas dinner was supposed to be special. Vanessa had spent weeks posting photos online about hosting the perfect family Christmas. Matching pajamas, gold table settings, personalized ornaments hanging from the staircase garland. Everything looked beautiful. Everything except the small card table tucked beside the kitchen like an afterthought. "It'll be more comfortable for you over there," Vanessa had told me earlier with a cheerful smile. "Less noise." I said nothing. I carried my plate there myself while everyone else gathered at the long walnut dining table Harold and I bought together 32 years ago. The same table where my children once fought over dinner rolls and spilled cranberry sauce across holiday tablecloths. The same table where I used to belong. Ethan suddenly stood from his chair and picked up his plate. "I want to sit with Grandma," he announced innocently. Vanessa's fork hit her plate harder than she intended. Daniel finally looked at me then, his face pale and uncomfortable, but he still said nothing. And in that moment, sitting beneath the glow of the Christmas lights while my grandson crossed the room toward me, I realized the cruelest part of being pushed out of a family isn't the rejection itself. It's watching everyone pretend they don't see it happening. The rest of dinner continued as if nothing had happened, which somehow felt worse than if someone had shouted at me. Vanessa laughed too loudly at stories that were not funny. My niece Claire kept complimenting the table decorations. Daniel poured himself another glass of wine and stared at the television mounted above the fireplace whenever the silence became uncomfortable. Only Ethan seemed confused by the strange tension floating through the room. He sat beside me at the small folding table with complete sincerity, happily swinging his legs beneath his chair while eating mashed potatoes shaped like little snowmen. "Grandma, your ham tastes better than everybody else's," he whispered, as if sharing a great secret. I smiled and cut another small piece for him. "That is because mine has extra brown sugar glaze," I said softly. Across the room, Vanessa watched us with narrowed eyes before quickly turning back toward her guests. The dining room glowed with warm white Christmas lights wrapped around the staircase railing. But the warmth stopped there. I could feel the distance between myself and the rest of the family more clearly than ever tonight. It sat in the room like an invisible wall. After dinner, everyone gathered near the fireplace to exchange gifts. Matching embroidered stockings hung neatly across the mantel, each one stitched with names in gold thread. Daniel, Vanessa, Ethan. Even their golden retriever Charlie had one. Mine was missing. I noticed it immediately, though I pretended not to. Vanessa handed out gifts carefully arranged beneath the tree with satin ribbons and handwritten tags. She moved gracefully through the room like the hostess of a magazine photo shoot, smiling at exactly the right moments. "Oh no," she suddenly said, placing one hand lightly against her chest. "Margaret, I think your gift bag got left upstairs somewhere. I am so sorry." Her tone sounded polished, practiced. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside the fireplace but said nothing to correct her. Again. Always silence. That is all right, I replied gently. I already have everything I need. Vanessa smiled with visible relief before turning back toward the others. But Ethan looked at me with the honest confusion only children still possess. How do you forget Grandma at Christmas? He asked loudly. The room froze for the second time that evening. Claire coughed awkwardly into her drink. Someone dropped a spoon in the kitchen. Vanessa's smile tightened again, thinner now. Sweetheart, accidents happen, she said quickly. But Ethan kept staring at the empty space above the fireplace where my stocking should have been hanging. And for the first time in years, I saw several people around the room begin to notice what had been happening to me all along. Not because they suddenly became kinder. Only because a little boy was brave enough to say out loud what every adult had been pretending not to see. Later that night, after the wrapping paper had been cleared away, and the guests drifted into smaller conversations around the house, I stood quietly in the kitchen rinsing dishes no one had asked me to wash. The window above the sink reflected the room behind me in soft blurry shapes. Vanessa stood near the island refilling wine glasses while Daniel laughed weakly at something Claire's husband said. Ethan sat on the living room floor building a plastic spaceship from one of his new toys. For a moment, watching them through the reflection almost hurt more than sitting alone earlier. They looked like a complete family. A happy family. And somehow I had become the shadow moving around the edges of it. I dried my hands carefully on a dish towel and glanced toward the refrigerator where dozens of Christmas cards were attached with magnets. Some came from neighbors. Some from old friends. In the center was the family photo Vanessa mailed out earlier that month. Matching cream sweaters. Snow-covered pine trees behind them. Daniel holding Ethan on his shoulders while Vanessa smiled perfectly into the camera. I was not in it. At first I assumed they had forgotten to bring me outside during the photo session. That was what I told myself anyway. But standing there tonight, staring at the card under the yellow kitchen light, I suddenly remembered something else. Last Thanksgiving, Vanessa had posted pictures online from a dinner at their country club. Everyone was there except me. She told me afterward that the reservation only allowed 6 guests. 2 months later, I saw another photo online that clearly showed 10 people seated at the table. Christmas before that, she said Ethan had the flu and they needed to cancel dinner at the last minute. Later that evening, Claire accidentally posted a picture from Vanessa's house showing everyone gathered around the fireplace drinking hot chocolate. Again, everyone except me. Small things. Quiet things. So quiet that each one sounded foolish whenever I tried explaining it to myself. I always found excuses for them because accepting the truth felt too painful. But tonight the excuses no longer fit together neatly. Margaret. Claire's voice startled me softly. She stepped into the kitchen holding 2 mugs of coffee. Mind if I keep you company? I smiled politely and nodded. We sat together at the breakfast nook while distant laughter floated from the living room. Claire wrapped both hands around her mug before speaking again. I need to ask you something, she said carefully. Has Vanessa always treated you like this? I looked down at the coffee swirling inside my cup. The steam fogged my glasses slightly. Like what? I asked quietly. Claire hesitated. Like someone she wishes was not here. The words settled heavily between us. Not cruel. Just honest. And for the first time in years, someone besides Ethan had finally said aloud what I had been too afraid to admit to myself. Claire left shortly after midnight, hugging me a little tighter than usual before walking out into the cold December air. I stayed behind to help clean even though Vanessa insisted twice that I did not need to. Her politeness always sounded rehearsed, like customer service from someone hoping you would leave quickly. Daniel disappeared upstairs while Vanessa loaded leftovers into glass containers for guests to take home. I quietly folded table linens at the dining room table Harold and I bought during our 25th wedding anniversary trip to Vermont. Back then, Daniel was still in college. He used to call every Sunday evening just to ask what I was cooking for dinner. Sometimes he drove 2 hours home only because he missed my pot roast. I remember one winter when a snowstorm shut down half the interstate and Harold told him not to risk driving. Daniel came anyway. He walked through the front door covered in snow, carrying a pumpkin pie from the little bakery downtown because he knew it was my favorite. Nobody should eat Sunday dinner alone, he said back then. I sat there now running my fingers along the polished wood surface while voices floated faintly from upstairs. So much of motherhood feels like collecting tiny memories and carrying them long after everyone else forgets them. I remembered helping Daniel buy his first car after college when his bank account barely held $300. Harold and I quietly paid his rent 1 year after layoffs hit the engineering firm where he worked. When Daniel married Vanessa, I welcomed her like a daughter. I hosted bridal showers, helped pay for the wedding flowers, watched Ethan 3 days a week when he was a baby so Vanessa could finish her marketing certification classes. I never kept score because family is not supposed to feel transactional. At least that is what I believed. But over the years something subtle changed in the house. Vanessa began correcting the way I decorated for holidays. She replaced Harold's old Christmas ornaments with color-coordinated ones from expensive department stores. She once laughed softly when I brought homemade pecan pie to Thanksgiving instead of ordering desserts from the country club bakery. "We are trying to keep things elegant this year," she told me while sliding my pie quietly into the back of the refrigerator. At the time, I convinced myself she did not mean to sound hurtful. Tonight, sitting alone at the long dining table after everyone else had gone upstairs, I finally stopped lying to myself. The rejection had not appeared overnight. It had been built carefully over years, one quiet humiliation at a time. I heard footsteps coming down the staircase and looked up, expecting Vanessa. Instead, Ethan stood there in blue plaid pajamas clutching a blanket against his chest. He walked over sleepily and climbed into the chair beside me. "Grandma," he whispered, "did you used to sit here before Mommy did?" I looked at the empty head chair at the far end of the table where Harold once sat carving turkey every Christmas Eve. Then I smiled softly at my grandson and answered the only way I could. "Yes," I said quietly. "A very long time ago." The next morning, snow covered the neighborhood in a thin silver layer that made everything outside look softer than it really was. I woke before sunrise in the guest bedroom Vanessa insisted was more practical for me since climbing stairs had supposedly become difficult at my age. The room smelled faintly of lavender spray and fresh paint. Nothing personal, nothing familiar. I sat quietly on the edge of the bed listening to the house settle around me. Somewhere downstairs, I could already hear Vanessa moving through the kitchen cabinets. Coffee mugs touching countertops. Refrigerator doors opening and closing. The ordinary sounds of family life continuing without warmth. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and walked downstairs slowly. Ethan was already sitting at the kitchen island eating cereal while watching cartoons on his tablet. The moment he saw me, his face brightened. "Grandma," he said happily. "I saved you the cinnamon rolls before Mommy put them away." My chest tightened slightly at such a small kindness. On the counter beside him sat a covered tray with the remaining cinnamon rolls from breakfast. Still warm. Vanessa stood near the stove scrolling through her phone while Daniel read emails at the dining table with his reading glasses low on his nose. Neither looked up when I entered. "Morning," I said softly. "Morning," Daniel replied automatically without lifting his eyes from the screen. Vanessa gave a quick, polite smile before returning to her phone. Ethan hopped down from his stool and carried a plate toward me with both hands very carefully. "Grandma likes extra icing," he announced proudly. Vanessa's expression tightened for half a second before smoothing out again. "Ethan, honey, let Grandma sit down first," she said lightly. I sat at the far end of the kitchen table while Ethan climbed beside me despite the empty stools closer to his parents. He talked cheerfully about the remote control truck Santa brought him while I poured coffee into a chipped snowman mug someone had apparently taken from the back of the cabinet. Across the room, Vanessa finally lowered her phone. "Daniel," she said casually, "do not forget we need to finalize the guest list for New Year's Eve tonight." Daniel nodded absently. "Right." Vanessa glanced briefly toward me before adding, "We have to be careful about space this year. Too many people makes everything feel crowded." Her voice sounded airy and harmless, but I felt the meaning settle heavily underneath the words. Ethan looked between us innocently. "Grandma can come," he said immediately. "She does not take up much room." Daniel coughed awkwardly into his coffee. Vanessa laughed softly, though nothing about her eyes looked amused anymore. "Sweetheart," she said carefully, "adults are talking." Ethan frowned down at his cereal bowl while silence spread through the kitchen again. I broke off a small piece of cinnamon roll and looked out the frosted window above the sink. Years ago, Harold used to shovel this driveway before sunrise every Christmas morning, while Daniel followed behind him in tiny snow boots carrying a plastic shovel twice too big for his hands. Back then this house felt full. Not just occupied. Loved. And sitting there now, watching my grandson quietly defend my place at the table, while the adults around him avoided uncomfortable truths, I realized something painful. Ethan was the only person in this house still treating me like family without needing to be reminded. That afternoon, Vanessa suggested everyone take family pictures outside before the snow melted. She said it with the same bright voice she used whenever she wanted something to sound spontaneous, even though every detail had already been planned days earlier. Ethan became excited immediately and ran upstairs to put on the matching cream sweater Vanessa bought for everyone. I remained in the living room quietly folding blankets while Vanessa directed people toward the front hallway. Claire, stand closer to Daniel. Ethan, tuck your scarf in. Perfect. Her voice floated through the house like someone arranging a department store display. I watched through the window as they gathered near the pine trees lining the driveway. The snow reflected soft afternoon sunlight, making the whole scene look almost unreal. Vanessa moved everyone carefully into position while Daniel held Ethan on his shoulders. Then she lifted her phone and smiled brightly toward the camera stand she had set up earlier. I waited for someone to call my name. No one did. After a few moments, Claire finally looked back toward the house through the front window and noticed me standing there. Even from inside, I could see the hesitation on her face. She leaned toward Vanessa and appeared to say something quietly. Vanessa barely glanced toward the window before waving one dismissive hand. Claire looked uncomfortable but said nothing else. The camera flash went off 3 times. I turned away before the 4th picture. In the kitchen, I slowly washed already clean dishes just to give my hands something to do. Outside, laughter drifted faintly through the glass while cold water ran over my fingers. Years ago, Harold used to insist I stand beside him in every family picture, even when I complained about my hair or the way I looked in winter coats. One day these photographs will matter more than we realize, he always said. Back then I thought he meant memories. Now I understood he meant proof. Proof that once upon a time I belonged somewhere. The back door suddenly opened and Ethan rushed inside breathless from the cold. "Grandma, come outside," he said quickly. "You forgot the picture." Before I could answer, Vanessa stepped in behind him, snow dusting the shoulders of her coat. "It is all right," she said smoothly. "We already finished." Ethan frowned. But Grandma was not in any of them. Vanessa pulled off her gloves carefully. "Sweetheart," Grandma said she was tired. I looked at her calmly. "I never said that." The room went very still. Vanessa paused for only a second before giving a soft laugh. "Oh, well. I assumed." Ethan looked between us with growing confusion while Daniel entered behind them carrying camera equipment from outside. He heard the last part of the conversation but immediately focused on unzipping his coat instead of meeting my eyes. Something inside me settled quietly then. Not shattered. Not broken. Settled. Like snow finally reaching the ground after drifting for too long in cold air. Because for the first time I stopped wondering whether the exclusion was intentional. Vanessa had just answered that question herself. And the worst part was not her cruelty. It was my son standing 3 feet away pretending not to hear it. That evening the house grew quieter after Claire finally left and Ethan was sent upstairs for his bath. Snow pressed softly against the windows while an old jazz Christmas album played low through the kitchen speakers. Vanessa stood near the counter arranging leftover cookies into decorative tins, as if preparing for another photograph nobody asked for. Daniel sat at the dining table scrolling through work emails again. His shoulders slumped with the tired posture of someone who spent years avoiding difficult conversations. I carried a stack of folded towels toward the hallway closet when I heard Vanessa speak in a lower voice than usual. "We cannot keep doing this forever, Daniel." I slowed my steps without meaning to. "Doing what?" he asked quietly. Vanessa sighed impatiently. "Tiptoeing around your mother." Silence followed for a moment, then the soft clink of a wine glass touching the counter. "She is lonely," Daniel finally said, though his voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "She is not lonely," Vanessa replied. "She refuses to move on. There is a difference." I stood perfectly still in the dim hallway while the conversation drifted toward me through the warm kitchen light. Every holiday becomes about managing her feelings, Vanessa continued. The sad looks. The awkward silence. Ethan noticing everything. It changes the energy in the room. Daniel rubbed his forehead slowly. I knew the gesture without seeing it. He used to do the same thing during math homework at 12 years old whenever he felt overwhelmed. What do you want me to do? He asked. Vanessa lowered her voice further, but I still heard every word clearly. Maybe it is time we helped her transition somewhere smaller. Somewhere with people her own age. This house is not healthy for her anymore. Healthy for her. Such gentle words for something so cruel. My fingers tightened around the towels in my arms. Harold and I bought this house 34 years ago after saving every extra dollar we had. Daniel learned to ride a bicycle in this driveway. Ethan took his first steps in the living room beside the fireplace. Every inch of this place held pieces of my life stitched quietly into the walls. Yet Vanessa spoke about it like outdated furniture ready to be moved into storage. Daniel stayed silent for so long that I almost convinced myself he might defend me this time. Instead he sighed heavily. Maybe after New Year's, he murmured. We can start discussing options. Something cold settled deep inside my chest then. Not surprise anymore. Clarity. I carefully placed the towels inside the closet before walking back toward the guest room without making a sound. Neither of them noticed me past the hallway entrance. Upstairs, I sat alone on the edge of the neatly made guest bed staring at the framed watercolor painting Vanessa hung above the dresser, because she once said family photographs made the room feel cluttered. A few minutes later, someone knocked softly at the door. Ethan peeked inside wearing dinosaur pajamas and holding a small plate wrapped in plastic. I saved you another cinnamon roll, he whispered proudly. I smiled and took the plate from his tiny hands while tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes. Because in a house full of adults deciding where I belonged, the only person still trying to make room for me was 8 years old. The morning after Christmas arrived gray and bitterly cold. Thin ice clung to the edges of the driveway while the neighborhood remained unusually quiet after the holiday excitement faded away. I packed my suitcase slowly inside the guest room, folding sweaters with careful hands while the sounds of the house carried faintly through the hallway. Vanessa was already downstairs speaking cheerfully on the phone about New Year's decorations. Daniel had left early to meet a client downtown even though it was supposed to be vacation week. Avoidance had become his favorite form of communication. I zipped my suitcase closed and looked around the room one last time. Nothing in it carried any trace of me. No framed photographs. No books beside the bed. No extra slippers tucked beneath the dresser. It looked exactly the same as it had the day I arrived. Temporary. Replaceable. Downstairs, Ethan sat at the kitchen island coloring in a Christmas activity book while Vanessa arranged fresh flowers in a tall glass vase. She smiled brightly the moment she saw my suitcase. Too brightly. Leaving already? She asked with polished surprise. I thought maybe you would stay until New Year's. I adjusted my coat sleeve calmly. I think it is better if I head home. Vanessa nodded slowly as if trying not to appear relieved. Well, we know how much you value your independence. Independence. Another soft word people use when they want older women to disappear quietly. Ethan jumped off his stool immediately. I do not want Grandma to leave yet, he protested. Vanessa placed one hand lightly on his shoulder. Grandma has her own life, sweetheart. Ethan looked unconvinced. Before I could answer, the front door opened and Daniel stepped inside carrying a cardboard file box against his chest. Snowflakes clung to the shoulders of his coat. Forgot. These in the office, he muttered distractedly while setting the box on the dining table. Paper spilled slightly from the top as he removed his gloves. Vanessa walked over to help him straighten the folders while I stood nearby putting on my scarf. Then something caught my eye. A familiar blue binder sat half hidden beneath several envelopes inside the box. My name was written across the tab in Harold's handwriting. I froze instantly. Harold kept every important legal document inside blue binders organized by year and category. After he passed away, Daniel told me most of the paperwork had already been sorted and archived. Yet somehow one of Harold's binders ended up forgotten inside Daniel's office box. What is that? I asked quietly. Daniel glanced down. Oh, Just old estate documents. Vanessa immediately closed the box lid. Too quickly. Nothing important, she added with a small laugh. But I had already seen the label beneath my name. Property transfer authorization. The room suddenly felt colder despite the heat humming through the vents overhead. Harold never handled property matters casually. Every signature, every title, every financial document mattered deeply to him because he spent decades building stability for our family from nothing. Daniel avoided my eyes as he slid the box toward the hallway. And in that moment, watching both of them tense over one forgotten binder, I realized there might be something far more dangerous hidden inside this family than exclusion. The drive home felt longer than usual. Snow flurried lightly across the windshield while the radio played soft instrumental music I barely heard. My mind stayed fixed on the blue binder sitting inside Daniel's office box, and the look that flashed across Vanessa's face when I noticed it. Fear. Brief but unmistakable. Harold used to say people reveal the truth in the first expression they fail to control. After 40 years in business, he trusted reactions more than explanations. By the time I reached my house, the afternoon sky had already darkened into a dull winter gray. I unlocked the front door slowly and stepped inside the silence that had once frightened me after Harold died. Now, it felt strangely peaceful compared to the tension I had just left behind. My living room still carried traces of Christmas. The tree lights glowed softly near the window, reflecting against old glass ornaments Harold collected over 3 decades. Everything here felt real, not staged for photographs. I removed my coat and walked directly toward Harold's old study at the back of the house. Most of his things remained exactly where he left them. Leather chair beside the bookshelf, brass reading lamp, filing cabinet organized with military precision. After his funeral, I could barely bring myself to enter this room. But now, for the first time in years, I opened the bottom filing drawer and began searching carefully through the property records Harold kept alphabetized inside thick folders. 20 minutes later, I found the original deed to this house. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the papers beneath the warm desk lamp. Harold's name appeared first. Mine second. Joint ownership with survivorship rights. Exactly as I remembered. But clipped behind the deed sat another document dated 6 months before Harold passed away. Property transfer authorization. The exact title I had seen on the blue binder. My stomach tightened. Harold's signature appeared at the bottom beside the name of his attorney, Martin Keller. I read the document twice before the meaning fully settled in. If anything happened to Harold, ownership of the property could not legally be transferred, sold, refinanced, or altered without my direct written consent. Not Daniel's. Not anyone else's. Mine. I leaned back slowly in Harold's chair while the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock filled the study. Suddenly every conversation from the past year rearranged itself inside my mind like puzzle pieces finally locking together. Vanessa constantly bringing up downsizing. Daniel casually asking whether maintaining the house felt overwhelming. Their sudden interest in retirement communities. Even Christmas itself. It was never only about excluding me socially. They needed me emotionally weakened. Easier to pressure. Easier to convince. Easier to move out voluntarily. I stared down at Harold's signature while tears blurred the ink for a moment. Not from sadness this time. From realization. Harold knew something before he died. Maybe not everything, but enough to protect me. My phone buzzed softly on the desk beside me. A text message from Daniel appeared across the screen. Mom, Vanessa and I were thinking maybe we should all sit down after New Year's and talk about what is best for your future. I looked around the study Harold built with his own hands during weekends after work 30 years ago. Then I quietly locked the property documents back inside the drawer and turned off my phone without replying. The days after Christmas passed quietly, but something inside me had changed permanently. I no longer waited for Daniel to call first. I no longer checked family group messages hoping someone would include me in plans. Instead, I spent my mornings in Harold's study reviewing paperwork I should have examined years ago. Bank records, insurance policies, property documents. The deeper I looked, the more carefully Harold's protections revealed themselves. He had anticipated far more than I ever realized. One snowy afternoon, I drove downtown to meet Martin Keller at his law office. Harold trusted Martin for nearly 20 years, And after reading those documents, I needed answers from someone who still respected my husband enough to tell the truth plainly. Martin looked genuinely surprised when his assistant showed me into his office. "Margaret," he said warmly, standing immediately to hug me. "It has been too long." His office smelled faintly of coffee and old leather books. Snow drifted slowly outside the tall windows overlooking Main Street, while I placed the property authorization papers carefully on his desk. Martin adjusted his glasses and grew very quiet as he read them. "You found these," he said softly. "I found them because someone forgot to hide them properly," I replied. Martin leaned back heavily in his chair. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed. "Harold came to see me 6 months before he passed away," he admitted. "He was worried." My chest tightened slightly. "About what?" Martin folded his hands together carefully. He noticed increasing pressure from Daniel and Vanessa regarding the house, suggestions about selling it, discussions about retirement communities. At first he thought they were simply being overprotective. But then Vanessa asked unusual questions about ownership transfers during a dinner party at your home. I stared silently at the snow falling beyond the office windows. Even now, hearing it spoken aloud still hurt. "Harold did not trust her intentions," Martin continued quietly. "That is why he updated the property protections. Legally, nobody can force you out of that house or pressure a sale without your consent." I lowered my eyes toward the papers resting between us. Harold knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Martin hesitated before opening a drawer beside his desk. He removed a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in Harold's handwriting. My breath caught immediately. "He instructed me to give you this only if I believe someone was trying to manipulate you regarding the property," Martin said softly. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the envelope. Inside sat a single folded letter. "Margaret, if you are reading this, it means my fears were probably right. Please remember something very carefully. You built this home with me. You sacrificed for it with me. Nobody has the right to make you feel like a guest inside your own life." I stopped reading for a moment because tears blurred the words completely. Martin looked away politely, pretending not to notice. Outside, snow continued drifting across Main Street while the grandfather clock inside the lobby chimed 3 slow times. And sitting there in Martin Keller's office holding Harold's final warning in my hands, I realized I was done being silent simply to keep everyone else comfortable. New Year's Eve arrived with freezing rain tapping softly against the windows and gray clouds hanging low over the neighborhood. Around noon, Daniel called asking if he and Vanessa could stop by that evening to have an honest family conversation. His voice sounded overly careful, like someone rehearsing lines before a difficult meeting. I agreed calmly and spent the afternoon preparing coffee and setting out a plate of shortbread cookies Harold used to love during the holidays. At 6:30 sharp, their SUV pulled into the driveway. Through the front window, I watched Vanessa adjust her coat collar and smooth her hair in the side mirror before stepping out. Presentation always mattered to her, even when delivering unpleasant news. Ethan rushed toward the front door the moment they entered. "Grandma!" he shouted happily, hugging me tightly around the waist. Daniel smiled faintly while Vanessa handed me a small poinsettia plant wrapped in silver paper. "For the house," she said brightly. We sat together in the living room where the Christmas tree still glowed softly in the corner. For a few minutes, everyone avoided the real conversation. Ethan talked about his new remote control truck. Daniel complimented the coffee. Vanessa commented on how peaceful my house felt compared to the city. Then Ethan wandered upstairs to look for old board games, and the atmosphere changed immediately. Vanessa placed her coffee cup down carefully on its coaster. "Margaret," she began gently, "Daniel and I have been thinking a lot about your future lately." I folded my hands quietly in my lap and waited. Daniel cleared his throat. "We just want to make sure you are comfortable long-term, Mom." There it was again. Comfortable. Safe. Supported. The soft language people use when they want control to sound compassionate. Vanessa leaned slightly forward. "This house is very large for one person. The stairs. The maintenance. The winters." She glanced around the room with polite concern. "There are wonderful retirement communities nearby with activities and social groups." I noticed Daniel still could not fully meet my eyes. Not even now. And what would happen to this house? I asked calmly. Vanessa answered too quickly. Well, obviously selling it would give you financial flexibility. Daniel nodded weakly beside her. It just makes practical sense. I looked toward the Christmas tree lights reflecting softly against the old family photographs on the mantel. Harold holding Daniel beside a snowman at age 6. Ethan smiling with missing front teeth during his first piano recital. 34 years of life inside these walls reduced to practical sense. Slowly, I reached beside my chair and picked up the blue property binder I had placed there before they arrived. The moment Vanessa saw it, all color drained slightly from her face. Daniel froze completely. I laid the binder carefully on the coffee table between us. I met with Martin Keller yesterday, I said quietly. Silence filled the room instantly. Outside, freezing rain tapped steadily against the windows while the fire crackled softly beside us. Vanessa's expression tightened. Daniel stared at the binder like it might explode. I looked at my son calmly for a long moment before speaking again. Your father knew someone might eventually try to pressure me into leaving this house, I said softly. What hurts me most is that he turned out to be right. The room stayed silent for several long seconds after I spoke. Vanessa sat perfectly still on the edge of the sofa, her hands folded tightly together while Daniel stared down at the blue binder resting on the coffee table between us. For the first time in years, neither of them seemed certain what to say next. The fire crackled softly beside the Christmas tree while rain slid slowly down the windows behind them. Finally Daniel exhaled heavily and rubbed both hands across his face. Suddenly he looked older to me. Not like my little boy anymore. Just a tired man sitting in the middle of consequences he spent years avoiding. Mom, he said quietly. It was never supposed to feel like we were pushing you out. I looked at him calmly. Then why did it feel exactly like that? He opened his mouth but no answer came. Vanessa shifted beside him. Margaret, we only wanted what made sense for everyone. I nodded slowly. Including the house. Her expression hardened almost instantly. There it was. The honesty hidden underneath years of polite smiles. This house is too large, she said carefully. And honestly, Daniel and Ethan would eventually inherit it anyway. I felt something inside me finally grow still. Not angry. Not shattered. Just clear. Eventually, I repeated softly. After I am gone. Not while I am still sitting in my own living room. Vanessa looked away first. Daniel's shoulders slumped lower. Upstairs, Ethan's footsteps moved faintly across the hallway, while the grandfather clock chimed 7 times near the staircase. I reached for Harold's letter still tucked inside the binder and held it carefully in my lap. Your father spent his whole life building security for this family, I said quietly to Daniel. But he also taught me something important. Love without respect eventually turns into loneliness. Daniel's eyes filled slightly then. Perhaps with guilt. Perhaps with grief. Maybe both. For the first time all evening he finally looked directly at me. I am sorry, Mom, he whispered. And the painful thing was that I believed him. But apologies do not erase years of silence. They do not magically rebuild a place at the table, once someone has spent so long pretending you were invisible. A few minutes later, Ethan came downstairs carrying an old family photo album he found in the upstairs closet. He climbed beside me on the sofa and opened it excitedly across our laps. Inside were dozens of faded Christmas pictures stretching back over 30 years. Harold carving turkey. Daniel hanging lights on the roof at 16 years old. Me standing in the kitchen wearing flower-covered aprons while everyone laughed around the table. Ethan pointed at one photo carefully. Grandma, he said softly, you look happy here. I smiled gently and brushed one finger across Harold's photograph. I was. Ethan leaned against my shoulder while rain continued tapping softly outside. Across the room, Daniel stared quietly at the old photographs while Vanessa sat in uncomfortable silence beside him. And for the first time in a very long while, I realized something important. Being alone never hurt me as much as sitting at a table where people quietly hoped I would disappear. But now they knew I was not disappearing anywhere. Not from my home. Not from my memories. And not from my own life.